learn about these hidden gems in Hamilton Part 2. So I hope you enjoy it as much as we do. And so we'll turn it over to our two presenters, Brandon Sarber and Kyle Cummins.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us in our Better Hamilton Neighborhood feature, Hidden Gems Part 2. Some things you might miss if you aren't from the neighborhood. I am Kyle Cummins, 17 Strong Advisory Board Member and Outreach Committee Chair. I also had the pleasure to be a canvasser during the 2021 Comprehensive Property Inventory. Really cool. Checking out some of the...
How many miles did you walk, Kyle?
I think one day I walked 7.5 miles.
Okay.
My friend John is here as well. He did the same thing. But anyway, some of those cool things kind of spawned this as we saw some of the hidden spaces in Hamilton. Grew up in Lindenwold. I lived in Highland Park for a couple seconds, and now I currently reside in our Washington neighborhood right by Bridgeport Elementary. And
My name is Brandon Sarber. I work for the city of Hamilton, and I have amateur Hamilton historian because there are people who have forgotten more about Hamilton history in this room who I hope keep me honest here as we're going through it. I too grew up in Lindenwold. If Lindenwold's in the house, let me hear you make some noise.
we show up, folks. We show up.
All right. Yeah, and I currently live in the German village, but yeah, I won't say anything.
Okay.
I'll go ahead.
And I also want it to be known that on the Facebook thing this morning, where it showed Brandon Sarber and Kyle Cummins, I was 1.5 inches taller on the Facebook thing. So there you go. Anyways, so getting to our program. What is a hidden gem, right? Unique home not easily seen along busy roads, block of beautiful homes on a neighborhood side street or deep in a subdivision, great park or unique public space not known outside of the neighborhood, or a place of historical significance, possibly not known to residents. Now this is our sequel, we took some liberties in some of these spaces. You'll know what I'm talking about. We had a lot of fun doing this. So I'll be brief in terms of the review. I see a lot of the same faces that were with us in our Hidden Gems Part 1, but anyways, I think it was last fall, Brandon and I were up here, and that kind of started this. So we had a lot of success, good feedback, so we figured, what the heck, we'll try it again. So one of them, Atrium of Mercantile Loss, we talked about the glorious 40th Street feature right there, and how they rejuvenated that part. That's in our downtown area. We also talked about Bailey Square in our Riverview and Second Ward neighborhood, the importance of having that sense of connection and meeting place for the residents, and how impactful that can be. Houston Street, some of those cool renovations, that's in our Rossville area. The corner stores, we talked about Garcia and Rose's in particular in our Jefferson neighborhood, and the impact of small business and the positivity that creates in those neighborhoods. Tiffin Castle, how I was scared to death as a child, going up there for Halloween, even though they were nice people. They're probably going to sue me for defamation at this point, but anyways, it's glorious if you haven't seen it. It's on Tiffin, the original Lindenwold station, and of course, the entrance into Milliken Woods in Armandale.
All right, there was a lot more that we went through last year, but we didn't want to belabor that point. So this is part of us taking liberties here. What used to be, those of you who know me know that I'm a Hamilton history nerd. So let's start at the beginning. Fort Hamilton. We were the second in a chain of forts to secure the Northwest Territories early after the American Revolution. I'll be brief about this. So 1791, thereabouts, General Arthur St. Clair, a good personal friend of Alexander Hamilton and George Washington, comes through, builds Fort Washington in what is now known as Cincinnati. That's why we have Fort Washington Way. And the second in that series of forts was Fort Hamilton. So it was not the Vice President of the United States. It was not even the Secretary of State. It's not Fort Adams. It's not Fort Jefferson. It was Fort Hamilton. I think that really shows how important Alexander Hamilton was in those days. So 1791, Arthur St. Clair comes through. We talked a little bit about that campaign and how 2 Mile Creek is named for where they camped after the first day's march, 4 Mile Creek after the second day, and 7 Mile Creek after their third day's march. Arthur St. Clair ended up going up and he was humiliated. He was defeated, and that fort, he was relieved of his command, ultimately to become the governor of the Northwest Territories, and they brought in a guy by the name of General Matt Anthony Wayne. You may have heard of him. He comes through, doubles the size of the fort, eventually secures the Northwest Territories for development, because we were very much in debt, especially to the French government early in our history as a nation. So the thought process was, let's, in effect, steal all this land from the native population, and then we'll sell it off to people like John Cleve Sims, who can then develop this. So all that was left after the fort was decommissioned in 1795 was the Powerhouse there. In 1795, the initial city was platted. Very few people know Israel Ludlow, who also platted Los Santoville, which was to become Cincinnati, and also the city of Dayton, initially named this city the city of Fairfield. We were called the city of Fairfield as it was platted. However, most people knew the name of the fort, and that name eventually stuck. So, historic cemeteries. We've got a guest out there. Come on in, we'll embarrass you.
It's the big surprise.
Hey! You're
Big reveal.
Historic cemeteries of the city of Hamilton and the city of Rossville were two separate cities. Most of you may be aware of that. They merged in the mid-1800s, but when they were originally laid out, there were two spaces that are now parks that were originally the burying grounds of both Hamilton and Rossville. In Rossville, that is the Triangle Park that sits just off of Park Avenue between Park and Wayne. It's now known as Sutherland Park, but that was the original burial ground for Rossville. And Sims Park, just south of downtown here, sometimes known as 4th Street Park, was the burying ground for Hamilton on that side of the river. In the 1860s, I think it was, Greenwood Cemetery was complete, and those bodies were presumably exhumed and moved there. I'm sure there are some remains that are still there, so if you get an eerie feeling in either of those parks or your children are talking to someone who's not there,
don't dig too much.
yeah. Penn Station. So there's been a lot made recently of our historic rail station that we have just south of downtown here on MLK. That was the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. Before that, it was known as the Cincinnati-Hamilton-Dayton Railroad Station. We had a second railroad station that I would argue is more architecturally significant that existed on South 7th Street in the railroad tracks. If you know where the gas station is here on East High Street, kind of across the street and behind there. That was for Pennsylvania Railroad. So this was, in effect, our Penn Station. That was torn down approximately 30 years ago. Old high schools. The one on the left there is the original Central Hamilton High School. That existed on the corner of Ludlow and South 2nd Street. It's now a parking lot. A beautiful historic structure. Many of these we wish we still had. Then Hamilton High School moved to 6th and Dayton, currently the home of the Dayton Lane Garden Apartments. And that is the top picture, top center picture there. More recently, that was known before it was torn down as, was it Harding? Harding Jr., yeah. But before that, it was originally built as Hamilton High School. If we go across the street from there, what is now the Board of Education was originally Hamilton Catholic High School. That was an all-boys school. And then the sister school, the all-girls school, was Notre Dame High School, which is now Sherman Manor that exists on South 2nd Street. Those two schools closed in the late 60s when they combined to make Stephen T. Baden High School on the west side of town. But the structures still remain. The former Catholic High, the Board of Education building, was designed by a gentleman who is really known as Hamilton's architect. Maybe that's Mike Dingeline today, but you know, certainly over the course of our history, some of the most significant buildings within our downtown and great homes within our neighborhoods were designed by a gentleman named Frederick Mueller, who designed that building as well. The Hamilton Hydraulic, you know, I often say the North End is probably Hamilton's most indispensable neighborhood to what it is today and what it became. Hamilton was known as the greatest manufacturing city of its size in the world at the time, and a lot of that heritage, as Mike touched in his presentation at the celebration breakfast, a lot of that heritage comes from the hydraulic canal. Henry Ford. You can see it powering Niles Toolworks, which is a business that Mike highlighted in his presentation. And then in the bottom right there, Henry Ford installed our first hydroelectric power plant to generate electricity on that hydraulic canal. And that continues to operate today. It's one of 3 hydroelectric power plants that the city of Hamilton owns a majority stake in. The other 2 are on the Ohio River. So we benefit greatly from that renewable source of energy through hydroelectric power. The hydraulic canal is not to be confused with the Miami and Erie Canal, which ran along present-day Route 4, which was for transporting goods. This was strictly to create power. And we always like to highlight some recent development here. So we've been affectionately calling these the twins. Highland Park resident Josh Asbury has been working really hard to renovate these 2 homes. So we always want to shout out anybody who's doing great restoration work in our neighborhood. Another kind of interesting thing, and or Kyle might talk a little bit about this later, but before there were bridges across the river, we had 2 ferries, the upper ferry and the lower ferry. An interesting thing though, I think looking at the aerial here, and I don't want to steal Kyle's thunder, but Ross Avenue was originally intended to be the main thoroughfare it was then called Ross Street. Main Street had a different name at that point, but you can see High Street lines up a lot more clearly with Ross Avenue than it does Main Street. So that was the upper and lower ferry. That's how people and goods got across the river.
Alrighty, and please, your knowledge is vast and unmatched, so interject at any time you want to. He's paying me. Anyways, so street names. Hamilton obviously has some historical significance with their street names. Here we're going to talk about Rossville street names. In Rossville, what they were called and kind of what they're currently called now. Brandon sort of alluded to Ross Street, which is now Ross Avenue, and how it was intended to be the main street in the city of Rossville. The first bridge was built in 1819 at present location of High and Main. And also, Rossville was platted in 1804 by land speculators and named in honor of Senator James Ross of Pennsylvania, who was a champion for the settlement of the western frontier. So that's how it gets the name Ross. There's Morris Street, which is now called Main Street. It's named for Senator Governor Morris of New York. He wrote a little thing called the Preamble to the Constitution. You know, we the people, all that kind of cool stuff. He was actually one of the few Constitutional Convention delegates to openly oppose slavery.
Can I just jump in
Yes,
real quick?
of course.
So, Governor Morris is an interesting character. I'm reading about this guy. He wrote the Preamble, and also he's a really impactful founding father. If you want some interesting reading tonight, read about his death. And maybe that's why we don't know about him. I'm not going to mention it here.
Good segue.
Yeah, sorry.
Talking about death. Oh, awesome. Where do I buy that book?
It's interesting.
I'm kidding. All right, so anyways, Boone Street, did I say that right, Brandon?
Yep,
Yes. Boone Street, which is now called Park Avenue. We have another guest. Should we play a trick?
Hey, Peter!
Hey! What did you bring us? All right. Come on down. Anyways, Boone Street, which is now called Park Avenue, is named for Elias Boone from New Jersey, former president of the Continental Congress during the American Revolution. Some of us, you know, we all know how George Washington is the first president of these United States, but I think there were 13 or 12, a number of presidents of the Continental Congress. I figured I'd impress you with that one, Brandon. North Street, which is now Wayne Avenue, South Street, which is now Arc Street, Water Street, which is now A Street, Front Street, B Street, 2nd Street, which is now C Street, and then 3rd Street is D Street. These are all...
One thing about those had to be renamed when we merged as cities because the city of Hamilton had streets by each of those names. So like Knightsbridge used to be South Street, and clearly we have the numbered streets. Water Street is now Monument.
Awesome. And then Linenwall. Represent Linenwall one more time. All right. We show up. Anyways, so Linenwall street names in Linenwall. So a lot of these names right here are, well, they are governors in the state of Ohio in the 1800s. And in no rhyme or reason, they're in order. So we have, first of all, Tiffin, which was Ohio's first governor, Chase, Corwin, which actually preceded Chase, Bro, which somebody lives on Bro Avenue. I can't think.
I've never met anyone.
Wins a bunch of awards. Bro Avenue. Handsome fella, just grass is amazing. Anyways, Hayes, former U.S. President Rutherford B. Hayes, Noyes, Allen, St. Clair, which Brandon was talking about earlier, who was the governor of the Northwest Territories, Bishop Avenue, where Mawa grew up. I grew up on Bishop Avenue, Foster, and Hoadley. Those are some of the Lindenwall Street names. Anything to add there?
No, I grew up on Corwin.
You grew up on Corwin? Okay, cool. So we have Riley Street as well. Now, Riley Street and the Riley Block were owned by early Hamiltonian public servant John Riley. Can anybody here tell me what this is current day? Any guesses what that is? So it's the Journal Square, right?
Yeah.
It's the Journal Square. So he owned land and held his office here on the block bounded by High Street, South 2nd Street, Court Street, and South 3rd Street. Running through this block today is what we know as the Journal Square. However, this was originally known as Riley Street. Something kind of cool about John Riley, Riley Township is actually named after him.
Correct.
So, and our hidden subdivisions. One of the greatest characteristics of, in my opinion, Hamilton and the charm of it is some of our subdivisions. In this, I'll kind of highlight East End and our Lindenwall subdivisions, a couple of those. First of all, we'll talk about Van Buren Court on East End. John, I think you remember, I don't know if I was walking with you, but this was a particular area during our canvasser duties where we were taking inventory of properties in which we wrote a ton of A's. As you can see here, well manicured yards, perfectly stabled houses, great landscaping. I think the mayor actually
He's recognized them not only for the condition of their properties and their gardens, but also they do a spectacular Christmas display.
Yes.
On this this cul-de-sac.
Yeah.
And isn't it all one family?
There's pretty much one family owns most of the homes.
Yeah.
within
Especially the one, the court there, we first pulled in, it's Sam and Sheila Pike do the big display.
Yeah, and that little
Also
circle.
bring them that-
What's, just a part of Hamilton you wouldn't know, right? Unless someone kind of told you, hey, go down here, go down that road, which is kind of the idea of this. And then Vista, of course, which is between, is it between Hancock?
It's just off of Hancock, between Hancock and.
In 129, we've had much success in this area, probably our most successful Coffee with Council last year that Peaches organized. Once again, look, gorgeous house right here. And then we all know about Allen's Market, right? Well, especially if you're on the East End. For those that have never been there, I think it's a great idea to check it out, especially their taco dip. It's literally as big as this table right here. And point of fact, during the Bengals playoff run, I watched every single game at Matt Fritch's house on Dayton Lane, son of Councilwoman Carla Fear, and we had it every Saturday, didn't we, Carla? And we kept we'd be like, what are we going to eat next week? Well, hell, they won, so we're having the same damn taco dip. So we did that every week. So excellent, cool place. And Hammond, another, just look at that, gorgeous area. Another one of those scenarios to where when we were canvassing out there, nothing but A's. We would just go by. It's something kind of cool about this is between Rose and Bishop in the 1950s, it was only Bishop Avenue from St. Clair to Dixie Highway, right? And then to the south of that, thanks to the, Frank Downey helped me out with that, is your mom, right? And your parents grew up on that. So south of that was only Carlton Avenue. And off that spawned Dayspring, spawned Margaret, spawned Hammond. And another example of the neighbors and in the engagement in our Hammond subdivision is we had a really successful Love Your Block last summer on Dayspring Avenue, and a lot of those folks were real cool. It was also advantageous for the developers in that area because if you take Bishop all the way out, it runs right into Fisher Industrial Park, which used to be Fisher Body, GM, right? So I remember as a youth, as my aunt and uncle live on Margaret back there, you know, riding my bike in the early 80s, and a lot of the residents living there actually worked at Fisher Body because they could just walk there. So something kind of cool about that.
All right. So here's a couple interesting ones. How many people have noticed this house on Donna Avenue? This sits just off of Millville. I've often wondered about this house, so I reached out, this one and the next property, and I had my friend Dick Scheib help me find a little bit of history. So from what we can tell, this house was probably built prior to 1875, which is very, very old for this portion of the city. And it was owned by, oh geez, let me check my notes here.
Come on.
Believed to have been the home of Joseph and Alma Straub. Her maiden name was Pabst. And they owned the Straub Hotel at the corner of Main and A Street, which washed away in the 1913 flood. This one, Joni Kopis was at the first Hidden Gems, and she said, have you ever noticed that old farmhouse in Sanders? It's on Mark Avenue. So if you look at it, it sits just slightly off axis with the rest of the homes in the neighborhood. That house was owned by a lady named Pauline Schwartz, who's buried in Greenwood Cemetery along with her husband. But Pauline, interestingly enough, was the daughter of a famous Cincinnati beer baron by the name of Conrad Windisch. He was an early owner in the Moorline Beer Company, and then ultimately Windisch Mulhauser, Mulhauser, we know that name in Butler County, was their beer company. Powerhouse Park, another Lindenwold shout out. All we have left is this water cooling tower. Powerhouse gets its name from this coal electric facility that powered a traction line that ran between Hamilton and northern Hamilton County. So Hamilton had its own streetcar network within the city, but this in particular was more of an interurban line that would take people from Hamilton to the northern parts of Cincinnati. And if you notice on the west side of Pleasant Avenue through most of Lindenwold, the houses are set back a little bit farther than the east side. That's where this train ran along. So that powerhouse was torn down. All that's left now is that silo that held water that was pulled out of the Great Miami to cool down the plant. Some of the historic firehouses, you know, if you're kind of driving through, you might say that structure looks a little off. They were called hose houses, and they were numbered by the ward that they were in. So the two that exist from this era of firehouse are for the 4th and 5th ward. So the 5th ward in the north end, they're on North 9th Street, and then the 4th ward here on the left, that's on East Avenue. I love these structures. I think they're phenomenal. Not on here is the former firehouse on Schuler, which is being renovated by a Cincinnati nonprofit known as Wave Pool. This is not, we're taking liberties here with Hidden Gems Part 2. This is not exactly hidden, but it's a super cool structure. And you might say, what is that doing there? This sits just on the corner of Hill Avenue and Pleasant Avenue in Lindenwold. The Sanjin Malt House, prior to Municipal Brew Works opening, this was the last vestige of our rich brewing heritage here in the city of Hamilton. This sits on the corner of Franklin and C. Is it Franklin? Right, Mike? Franklin and C. Very interesting structure that I know we'd all like to see repurposed, but currently sitting vacant.
Alrighty, so if we had additional historic districts, and aside from the historic district, the overlays of German Village, Dayton Lane, Rossville, and downtown, other neighborhoods with a high concentration of historic structures are Lindenwold, Riverview, Jefferson, East End, North End, Prospect Hill, and Highland Park. We're going to talk about a couple here. On Heaton Street, North End and Dayton Lane, just gorgeous. This is the birthplace on Eaton Street is the birthplace of Art in the Park, which is really cool. And you had something.
The Stone Tavern there on the bottom right, that's on the corner of Heaton and Greenwood, currently being renovated by the property owner, really kind of an iconic structure in the north end.
Awesome what they're doing there. And North C Street, you know, I feel like D Street, right, gets a lot of the credit for the walks, right, the pretty big houses. But I challenge you, if you're out there walking, and when I say challenge, I mean challenge, because there's a lot of hills. But I'm saying that there are some gorgeous homes on North C Street. Highlighted here, the first one, kind of cool, well, you can't really see it, can you? But the very first one is a place called Greg's Place by an individual in 1982 who basically renovated a home for people to go through recovery for addiction to alcohol and drugs. But I mean, I've driven by there, it's a really cool spot, really cool place, and there's a lot of pride that comes out of that. And these, once again, as Brandon alluded to, are Mueller designed homes.
The red brick one, I believe, is, Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, it certainly has his thumbprint.
Okay, so 1 out of 3. But anyways, gorgeous homes. Once again, just kind of, you hear about D Street, but a lot of times, you know, C Street gets no love. And of course, the gorgeous Tudors of One Highland Park, right? This should be on like a postcard. Gorgeous. If you've ever just gone down Dick Avenue in Highland Park, I mean, it's to the left, to the right, to the left, to the right. Nothing but gorgeous Tudors. The very first one right there is 306 North Dick Avenue. I actually lived there for a couple of years. Yes, just me and a puppy in that house. So it was a little too big for me, but it was a gorgeous home. And the other two up there, I think the middle one is 668 Emerson, and the other one, another gorgeous Tudor, is on Dick Street as well. So something kind of cool, like what they used to call Tudors back in the day. A lot of them were built in some of our northern states and cities because of the cold, and they can, I promise you, I honestly didn't have my heat on at all. It was able to withhold the cold. But also, they call them stockbrokers Tudors because typically in the 20s when they were built, it was a lot of the very prominent figures in society. So I thought those were really cool. And once again, doing good on time. What did we miss? Let us know a place or block that you think more Hamilton should see. We have our email up there. I appreciate it, and I know Brandon does it as well, for letting us spew some of our love for Hamilton and some of the cool. This is a lot of fun to research. We have a blast doing this. I'm sure we missed some. So feel free to reach back out to us. We thank you.
And if you want to see more of this, if you have an Instagram account, look up Hamilton Architecture on Instagram. They do such a great job. I don't know who runs it. I've reached out to them and said, hey, I appreciate what you do to shine a light on the corners of our neighborhoods that a lot of people don't see. But whoever that hero is, that's that. Oh, you know?
Yeah, I ran into him randomly while I was doing my own stuff.
All right.
And I was like, what y'all doing? You know,
That's
and
cool.
So we ended up exchanging info and talking.
Batman and Robin.
Yeah, so there's two guys that have been doing it. All of them do.
Very, very, very cool.
Yes.
Some really great structures throughout the city. There's plenty more. We could probably do this annually. So please let us know what we missed. And we thank you all for your time.
Thank you.
That concludes our presentation. So with this, we're going to move into our board meeting. You all are welcome to stay, but certainly not compelled to.
And we have some